How is purchasing managed in today's fast-changing business models and disruptive political governance? Why it needs to be changed in the contrast to the very first purchase managing systems of an economical stable era of the 60s? Professor Peter Kraljic is Director Emeritus of the worldwide management consulting firm McKinsey & Company and Supervisory Board Member at the IEDC School of Management in Bled. He's also author of the article From Purchasing to Supply Management, published in Harvard Business Review. As cited from the article, no company can allow purchasing to lag behind other departments in acknowledging and adjusting to worldwide environmental and economic changes. So, how can leaders recognize their own weaknesses and turn them into an effective supply management? Discussing it today with Professor Kraljic. Welcome. Let's focus on the public sector and government, African government first. How can supply chain support African government to develop economic growth and development, to enable economic growth and development?
Yeah, governments in all countries, not only African countries, also in developed countries, normally have huge budgets for investments. And I think the key is how to develop a very consistent strategy and realize a strategy of how to spend these government investments from whatever they are buying, from small goods up to the different new technologies. So a consistent strategy and execution of this strategy, considering what are the domestic suppliers we want to choose and foster, or which regions, how to help them develop the right level of qualities, which foreign suppliers to choose and how to attract them to my own country. And these all are a question of consistent supply or buying strategy of a government, allocating the spend of government to the right suppliers, be it domestically the foreign suppliers, to ensure growth and competitiveness.
Mm-hmm. What role can procurement and purchasing play in ensuring adherence to ethics and assist the public and also private sectors in reducing or ending fraud and corruption in Kenya and Africa as a whole?
Well, it's a good question. Fraud and corruption are unfortunately an everlasting problem, not only in Africa. You also have fraud and corruption in many other countries, even developed countries. So this is really a problem to deal with, because procurement and purchasing function are very often, because of the market role, are very often targets of such a corruption and efforts and bribery and so on. And I think to fight it, you take 2 or 3 measures. First is, government as such must focus on high standards of ethics and values in the country and represent also these ethics and values. And a good example of this are Scandinavian countries, which are very high on an ethical value, and there's hardly any corruption in those countries. It's in the mode of the people to reject corruption. The second is that you must appoint to the responsible position, be it in government, be it supply management, only purchasing, the most talented people and pay them well. You must reduce through that to ensure their position, that they are respected in the country, that they are well paid, and this will reduce the inclination to accept bribes or something. And this will be people with high ethical standards. And the third one is to be very severe. Whenever you detect examples of bribery and corruption, to act very quickly on the legal side and have the right legal measures to punish corruption and bribery. And here, good example is Singapore. Singapore basically has very few low corruption, because they are paying the top people very well. People in business position. The Prime Minister of Singapore is the best paid Prime Minister in the world. And they punish very severely any attempt of corruption and bribery. So it is a combination of those factors which you have to execute.
So does it need to start from the business or from the government, from the public sector?
From both. I think it's both. Government must be, and government people must be examples of ethics and values. And the same goes for the top business people. Once you ensure that, then you will be okay. We just had a discussion with a graduate class, and one question was corruption in African countries. Yeah, because very often the top level are being corrupt, and as long as the top level do not represent the value of the country, the rest will not follow the ethics. It starts on the top.
So what supply chain skills and knowledge should government leaders have to enable an efficient monitoring of purchasing, procurement and supply chain?
Well, I think first it's important that both business and government levels, leaders, understand the strategic importance of supply and supply management function and supply chain management, because this is really a core corporate function in any company, but also in many corporate or many government institutions. Because in most cases, I know, the supply manager controls anything between 30 and 80% of the total spend. And as I mentioned before, the governments normally have huge budget also, so this is also a very important chunk of government money which is controlled by supply management. Therefore, the supply management, both in the companies but also in the government, calls for adequate quality of the people there. That people must be both think analytical and strategic, and they must have good negotiating skills, because only then they will be able to execute the supply function to the satisfactory level which is needed, given the big amounts of money they're dealing with.
So let's move to the private sector only. How can African businesses correctly leverage the supply chain emerging trends to push for growth and business transformation?
Another very complex question. I think you should start with understanding, or we must start with understanding of a present very complex and very volatile environment in the globalized economy. Because there are a lot of things are changing, and a lot of things are changing very rapidly and unexpectedly. So you need a lot of, in the global market, so you need the skills which is required in supply chain management to deal with this volatile environment are the same skills which are demanded for CEO or any top managers dealing with the future and success and strategy of his company. That means that the top supply managers must have the quality of the CEOs and must have a good mixture of both strategic and operational qualities and skills, and understand what are the trends in the global markets, in the sectors they're dealing with, in the regions or the countries they're dealing with, because only on that base they will be able to develop a consistent and successful corporate strategy, supply strategies, which aim at both short-term impact, that means lower cost, but also the longer-term sustainability, because this is a real competitiveness, short-term performance and long-term sustainability.
Which mistakes should they avoid, maybe from a case point of view?
The big mistake would be to underestimate the impact of the supply management and the impact of that, and to not give it enough hierarchical position within the company or within the government, and not put really the top talent into the positions which are dealing with that. That for me is the biggest mistake. Because once you get the right corporate cloud and you have the right top talent in purchasing, then I think the function will be successful.
Mm-hmm. For a supply chain manager, for a procurement manager, which skills are coming next? Which skills are required for the future, for the coming future?
Yeah, I think the key is that the supply managers, but also other managers, only business managers or government, understand the trends which are happening together with the ongoing globalization of market, if you like it or not, but this is going on. To understand what's happening in the technological revolution, because we are in a phase of exponential technological revolution, more and more innovation. What is happening with the forthcoming digitalization, because this digitalization is going to happen and will influence the overall value chain and the whole supply chain, be it suppliers, be it our own companies or governments, be it our customers. So understanding of those trends, I think, is an essential condition for the top supply managers, but also for the top government officials or the top managers. And therefore, they must understand, in this context, also given these global trends, what is our overall global competitive position as a country, as a sector we are in, or as a region we are in, or as a company? And once you understand our competitive position, and when are our main advantages or also main deficiencies, then you can to start allocate the resources to those areas. And I think in most countries, and this is also basically my final in most countries, this competitive position is not so well understood or not necessarily fostered well by the governments. And if you look at the comparison globally, you see that there are some countries which are globally always in the top position among top 10, and these are not necessarily big countries. They can very often small, mid-sized countries, like Scandinavian countries, or like Singapore, or like Hong Kong, and some big countries like United States. But it's not a question of size, it's a question of concept.
So when you published the article in Harvard Business Review, it was in the early 80s, it's when the globalization basically started. Then nowadays we are used to globalization, we live in an era of globalization. What's coming next? What's the next step in supply management? Which trend is coming next, affecting the supply management?
Well, I think these trends which are affecting the supply management are identical with the trends influencing all businesses and all governments. I think that the globalization 30, 40 years ago, when supply management was developed, was simpler than today, because at that time it was still a kind of linear development. Today we have accelerated, so to say, exponential development, exponential evolution of technology, for example. And it is becoming much more volatile, partially due to political decision. Just think on the impact of the trade situation in the world and global markets through American decision, America first, and all the sanctions introduced there. This completely changed the picture, and the companies or the countries will have to be adapted to this. And so following these global trends, I think is one of the key skills which are needed to be successful, be in supply management, be it as a government.
You mentioned digitalization before. Is this also affecting in a big way the supply chain?
I think it's affecting the whole, I said not only supply chain, the fact that total value chain, because depending on sector, digitalization will happen sooner or later. And if you don't adapt in time, you will fall behind, because either your supplier or your customers will digitalize, and then you will be hung in the middle. So this is a must. And again, here is also a lot of competitive analysis has shown that some countries are already very far ahead in terms of being prepared for the next wave of digitalization, while some countries are still lagging and not taking this as a serious opportunity. And because if they don't take this opportunity, it will become a serious threat.
Mm-hmm. So for the conclusion, what message of encouragement would you like to deliver to our audience at the House of Procurement in their mission and vision to help transform Africa through supply chain and procurement excellence and education? So how to start and what areas to focus on?
Yeah, I thought about this question. It's a difficult question. First, for me, Africa is a continent with an enormous untapped potential in terms of talent and in terms of natural resources which they have. But unfortunately, most African countries and governments did not pay enough attention to the economic strategies and policies for individual countries which will allow them to tap this potential. If you look at the global comparisons of 63 countries, there's only one African country on that comparison, which is South Africa, which is in the place 53 or something among 63 analyzed countries, which is not a very good position. And one leading aspect must be there for all countries, starting with South Africa, but also for the other South African countries, to ensure competitiveness on country level, on the sectors, economic sectors they have, on the regions and the corporations they have, but also in the individual levels. That means on people, because people are the resource which Africa has. There are many very talented people, but unfortunately also many talented people leave Africa and go to West because they don't find adequate position in Africa itself. So I think my only recommendation would be to South Africa or other countries, the same I would give to any corporation to focus on four human resource related areas. One is education. You must invest a lot of education of young people and channel them towards the positions or jobs with the future. Second, you must invest enough into innovation, because innovation, that means investing into R&D, new products, new processes. 3% of GDP should be invested at least in innovation, and maybe 4 or 5% in education. The next element is increasing productivity and entrepreneurship of the people, that you start new companies which will create new jobs and will allow for growth. Because Africa is facing demographic explosion, and if there's not enough jobs created in time, you will have massive unemployment of unsatisfied young people. And the last one is also to invest into values of the country, avoid fraud, corruption, but put the values of cooperation and trust in front. So if you push on that 4 elements, of which are all people related, I think the African companies or African countries can grow and succeed and become very competitive also on the global level.
Professor Kraljic, thank you for your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much for your interest and a lot of success in the future.
Thank you.